She boarded quietly, dressed with elegance, holding nothing but grace, and a name that could bring a billion-dollar airline to its knees. When they forced her off the plane, they thought she was just another elderly black woman. What they didn't know? She controlled their largest funding pipeline. One phone call, no shouting, just power. What followed was a corporate reckoning no one saw coming until it was too late. If you feel drawn in, make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow we have a story that will leave you speechless. At 76, Gloria Jefferson carried herself with the quiet grace of someone who had lived a life of purpose. Her silver hair was swept neatly into a bun, and she wore a pale blue silk blouse, dark gray slacks, and a pair of simple pearl earrings. Her watch was old, a Timex she wound every night, reliable like her. She looked like a woman who had known structure, patience, and dignity. As she stood at Gate B4 in Phoenix Sky Harbor, she waited calmly, boarding pass in hand. There was no rush in her movements, no frustration in her face, even as the flight was delayed. When pre-boarding was announced for first-class passengers, she stepped forward with quiet confidence. She didn't need help. She didn't ask for it. She simply moved with purpose and took her seat, 2A. She was heading to Savannah to watch her great-granddaughter receive an award in robotics, a small moment of pride wrapped in love and legacy. But moments later, a flight attendant approached, followed by a man in a navy blazer. He didn't smile. "Ma'am, we'd like you to step off the plane for a quick reassignment discussion," he said, avoiding her eyes. Gloria asked calmly, "Am I being removed from this flight?" He offered no answer, only vague explanations. So she rose. She collected her things, and she walked off the plane with the same quiet dignity she had brought on board. No fuss, no anger. But it was an injustice all the same. Subtle, cutting, and deeply familiar. They didn't shout. They didn't accuse. They simply made her disappear. And in that silence, a different kind of harm was done. One that left no visible scars, but said, in effect, "You don't belong here." Gloria didn't speak to the man in the blazer again. As he tapped on his tablet, already walking away, she stepped to the side of the gate area. Calm, deliberate. She opened her leather satchel, reached for her phone, and made a single call. No loud protest, no raised voice. Just one clear sentence spoken into the receiver. "Ruben," she said when the line picked up, "we need to review our funding allocations for Tarmac Air. Something just happened." Her voice was steady. No anger, no rush, only certainty. She didn't offer an explanation. Ruben Diller didn't ask for one. He knew Gloria well enough to understand that if she made this kind of call from an airport terminal, it wasn't impulsive, it was intentional. And if she said, "Be ready," it was time to clear the calendar. They had worked side by side for over 2 decades. Ruben was the executive director of the Jefferson Family Trust. But more than that, he was Gloria's right hand, a man who understood both the power she held and the weight of how she chose to wield it. He had been with her through federal negotiations, aviation board shakeups, and philanthropic restructurings. Gloria was the visionary. Ruben was the builder. They were different in style, but always in sync. By the time she hung up, she had said no more than a few dozen words, but the consequences of that call were already in motion. Back in Baltimore, Ruben didn't hesitate. He didn't pour a cup of coffee. He didn't sit and wait. He opened the Jefferson Family Trust database, pulled up the funding files, and searched for Tarmac Air. The numbers were staggering. Over $137 million had gone to the airline over the past 4 years. Grants for carbon footprint reduction, staff development, fleet modernization. Gloria had personally approved nearly every line item, and now they were under review. He leaned back in his chair and muttered aloud, "God help them." Meanwhile, at Phoenix Sky Harbor, Gloria sat quietly near the terminal windows, her coat folded neatly in her lap. She wasn't rattled. She wasn't plotting revenge. She was documenting. In a small notebook, she began writing. Times, names, what was said, and what wasn't. Her pen moved slowly, not scribbling in haste, but writing with precision. Just like everything else she did. The injustice wasn't new. What was new was how she would respond this time. A few feet away, passengers whispered and watched. Some wondered what had happened. Some were too polite to ask. Others assumed it was just a policy matter. No one, not even the airline staff, realized they had just removed a woman who could stop millions of dollars from reaching them. The woman behind the counter, young nervous, searched her screen and offered practice reassurances. "We're working on rebooking you. We're a bit full today." But Gloria wasn't listening to apologies. She asked for the name of the supervisor who approved her removal. She asked for that supervisor's supervisor. Each question was asked without anger, without accusation, but each one struck like a match against dry wood. Back at the trust's office, Reuben began digging deeper. He examined performance reports tied to the airline's grants. Most were incomplete. A few were outright missing. One major red flag: not a single metric had been submitted for their emissions reduction program in over 18 months. That was more than just carelessness. It was non-compliance. Reuben's fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. In the contract language, there it was, a 12-month clause stating that violations of public conduct standards or even reputational damage linked to discriminatory behavior could trigger an immediate freeze on all funding. Not just future grants, everything, retroactively. He picked up the phone and dialed. Gloria answered on the first ring. "I've got everything pulled," he said. "I think you're going to want to hear this." She was seated in a small cafe just past security. No fanfare, just a cup of tea and the calm posture she always carried into boardrooms. "I'm listening," she said. Reuben explained the breach, the emissions data, the clause, the fact that they now had the legal grounds to suspend every penny tied to the airline. Gloria didn't interrupt. She didn't rush. She stirred her tea once quietly. "That wasn't just a breach," she said. "That was arrogance." "You want me to prep a statement?" Reuben asked. "No," she said, her voice firm. "Not yet. You want to give them a chance?" "No, Reuben. I want to give them time to realize they've already run out of chances." Reuben nodded to himself. That was classic Gloria. Not vengeful, not reactive, strategic, and above all, principled. Because for Gloria, this wasn't about ego. It wasn't about teaching someone a lesson. It was about accountability, about the quiet belief that people and institutions must be held to a higher standard, especially when they've been given resources to do better. Later that afternoon, Gloria received an email from a young woman named Marissa Wynn, a low-level administrator at Tarmac Air. She had seen an internal email discussing Gloria's removal. It mentioned optics. It mentioned too many non-premium flyers in the front rows. Marissa didn't know what Gloria would do with the information, but she knew something was wrong. Gloria forwarded the email to Reuben with one question. "Do we have her number?" Reuben's response came quickly. "We do now." That single phone call in the terminal, measured, quiet, and made without spectacle, had begun unraveling a corporate giant. Not because of rage, not because of threats, but because real power doesn't need volume. It just needs clarity, conviction, and timing. And Gloria Jefferson had all three. In the hours following Gloria Jefferson's quiet departure from Flight 218, the airline's operations continued, on the surface, like any other day. Flights boarded, gates buzzed, passengers came and went. But inside Tarmac Air's corporate headquarters in Des Moines, Iowa, the wheels of panic had already begun to turn. The first red flag came in the form of a Slack message sent by a junior communications analyst. "Does anyone know who we removed from 218? There's talk she might be connected to a major grant funder." The message was quickly buried in threads about protocol, reassignment policies, and HR language templates. But it caught the eye of Daryl Sumners, the company's communications director, who was scanning internal reports late into the evening. His eyes froze on a single sentence. "We might have just kicked off Gloria Jefferson." He read it again, then a third time. The Gloria Jefferson? The name was familiar. Her foundation was one of the largest contributors to their sustainability initiatives. She was a quiet but powerful figure, rarely in the spotlight, yet essential to their public-facing environmental credibility. Without her funding, their next quarterly green report would collapse under scrutiny. Within minutes, Daryl was on the phone with the vice president of legal affairs, then with external relations, and finally the CEO's office. The situation was no longer minor. It was a potential crisis. At the same time, far from the boardrooms and buzzwords, a young woman named Marissa Wynn sat alone in the break room. She hadn't meant to get involved. She had only been included on the internal email thread by mistake. A chain of directives from mid-level management discussing Gloria's removal in chillingly casual terms. One line stuck with her. Too many non-premium flyers in the front rows. Reassign for optics. Marissa stared at the screen in disbelief. There had been no mention of policy violations, no security concern. Just optics. The phrasing disturbed her, not just because it was wrong, but because it was routine. She had seen this kind of language before, coded, indirect, meant to slide under the radar. But this time, it was aimed at an elderly black woman who had been quietly ushered off a plane with no justification. It didn't sit right. She didn't know who Gloria was, but she knew it mattered. So she searched online for Gloria's foundation and found a general contact email. She wrote from her personal address, not sure if anyone would read it. She explained what she had seen, attached the email chain, and closed with a single line. I thought someone should know. She expected nothing in return, but she received a call later that day from Reuben Dillard. He didn't accuse. He didn't pry. He simply thanked her, told her she was doing the right thing, and that, more than anything, made her feel seen. Back at Tarmac Air, the ripple effects of Gloria's quiet exit were growing louder. Internal discussions turned tense. Department heads scrambled to trace responsibility. The term gate protocol reassignment began appearing in emails, vague, undefined, and insufficient. Employees whispered in hallways. Some shook their heads. Others, like Marissa, watched closely. Then came the headlines. Gloria hadn't spoken to the press, but someone had tipped off a journalist, likely Reuben, just enough to confirm the story's legitimacy. The article was concise. Philanthropist withdraws $800 million in airline funding after in-flight incident. It didn't show Gloria's face. It didn't need to. Her name, reputation, and the figure, $800 million, were enough to ignite public interest. Social media lit up within hours. Grainy phone videos from the gate began circulating. One clip showed Gloria calmly collecting her bag. Another caught a fellow passenger saying, "She didn't do anything. Why are they taking her off?" Suddenly, the story was real, tangible, and impossible to ignore. Inside Tarmac Air's headquarters, the mood shifted from confusion to dread. Legal teams reviewed contracts. PR drafted statements. Executives debated damage control. But they all knew the damage had already been done. And yet, amid the chaos, something else was happening. A quiet awakening. Whispers turned to questions. Questions turned to reflections. A retired flight attendant posted on LinkedIn, "This industry is built on discretion, but discretion shouldn't be a shield for discrimination." An entry-level analyst sent an anonymous suggestion to the ethics committee. "We need a review of how reassignment decisions are made and who they affect." Even board members began to take notice. One called for an internal audit. Another demanded a temporary leadership reevaluation. And Marissa, once just a name in the HR system, found herself at the center of something far bigger than she had expected. She hadn't meant to spark anything. She just didn't want what happened to disappear without a trace. But it hadn't. The removal of one woman, silent, dignified, composed, had forced an entire company to look inward. Not just at one decision, but at a pattern. A pattern that had, for years, pushed the wrong people aside while hiding behind procedures and corporate language. Now that pattern was exposed, not by protests, not by press conferences, but by a notebook, a phone call, an email, and the courage of people who, in their own quiet ways, chose to do something. What began as a silent injustice had become a reckoning, and it was only just beginning. Gloria Jefferson didn't rush into the spotlight. In fact, she tried to avoid it. She declined several interview requests, ignored calls from national networks, and turned down an offer to appear on a primetime news segment. For days, she kept to her rhythm: church on Sunday, tea in the afternoons, and phone calls with Reuben that often ended in silence rather than strategy. But Reuben had sensed it before she admitted it herself. The moment was bigger than the incident. It wasn't just about her removal from a flight. It was about every quiet dismissal that had gone unnoticed. every polite silence that allowed injustice to slip by. And now for once, the country was paying attention. When he called her on Monday morning, his voice was steady. "People are listening," he said. "You have a chance to shape this moment, Gloria, not just react to it." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she asked a single question. "Where would we do it?" He listed a few cities: Washington, Dallas, Los Angeles. "No," she said. "If I'm going to speak, it's going to be at the Civic Center in Macon, Georgia." That was where she had given her first public talk in 1974, when she stood before a skeptical audience and explained satellite telemetry as the only black woman in the room. Back when people doubted she even belonged in the building. On a crisp Thursday morning, the auditorium filled with a modest crowd. No massive banners, no flashing cameras. Just rows of folding chairs, a wooden podium, and a backdrop bearing the seal of the Jefferson Family Trust. The Georgia state flag hung beside it, a quiet reminder of where this all began. Gloria stood alone on the stage. No spokesperson, no teleprompter, no legal team. Just her voice and the weight of everything she had carried. "I didn't come here to get revenge," she began, her voice calm and even. "I came here to remind us what we've forgotten. Respect is not a gift. It is a right." The room fell still. She went on to explain what had happened, not in anger, but in clarity. How she was removed without reason, how the explanation was vague enough to pass as policy, but hollow enough to sting. How she didn't argue, didn't raise her voice, just made a phone call. And that phone call, she said, was not about punishment. It was about accountability. Because dignity, she paused, has a memory. She looked out across the room, meeting the eyes of students, city officials, educators, and retirees. Too often, she continued, we make excuses for the way institutions treat people. We say they didn't mean it. We call it a mistake. We let them hire a consultant, issue a statement, and move on. She leaned slightly on the podium, not from fatigue, but for emphasis. But what if every quiet dismissal meant something? What if we held people accountable before they went viral? Heads nodded. A few people wiped away tears. "I wasn't the first person this happened to," Gloria said, "and I won't be the last. But maybe, just maybe, next time a gate agent sees an older black woman with a boarding pass, they'll hesitate before assuming she doesn't belong there." She ended with no dramatic gesture, no applause cue, just a soft nod, a step back, and the truth laid bare. The speech was short, under 10 minutes, but it echoed far beyond that room. Clips from the talk spread quickly, not because of flashy sound bites, but because of its quiet weight. She didn't shame, she reminded. She didn't accuse. She invited reflection. A retired principal from Atlanta shared the video on her Facebook page with the caption, "We've waited years for a voice like this to speak softly and still be heard." Newspapers across the country ran pieces quoting Gloria's lines. Civil rights organizations cited her as a model of moral clarity. Even airline employees began circulating internal memos, urging deeper training, deeper listening. But for Gloria, the moment wasn't about becoming a symbol. It was about reclaiming her story. For decades, she had moved through rooms where her presence had been questioned. She had worked on defense contracts, aerospace technology, education initiatives, always in the background, always pushing others forward. She hadn't built her legacy for attention. She built it for progress. Now that legacy was being seen, and more importantly, it was being remembered. That evening, she sat on the porch of her daughter's home in Savannah. The air was cool. A soft breeze stirred the edges of her coat. Her great-granddaughter, Brielle, sat beside her with a notebook full of robotic sketches. "You didn't tell me you were famous," Brielle said with a grin. "I'm not," Gloria replied, smoothing her coat with one hand. "I'm just tired of being quiet." The moment was simple. No podium, no press. Just two generations sitting side by side. One who had fought silently for dignity, the other still learning how to claim it. And that, more than any headline, was the legacy Gloria Jefferson was reclaiming, not for herself alone, but for every person who had ever been told, in quiet, coded ways, that they didn't belong. Now they had someone who showed them otherwise. Long after the news cycle moved on, Gloria Jefferson's story continued to resonate. It wasn't just the scale of the funding she withdrew or the quiet force of her response. It was the way she reminded people, across professions, backgrounds, and generations, that dignity still matters, and that silence, when used with purpose, can speak louder than outrage. Across the country, reactions poured in. A retired baggage handler in Fresno told his wife, "That could have been my sister." A gate agent in Charleston slipped a handwritten note into the carry-on of an elderly black woman traveling alone. It read, "I saw what they did to Ms. Jefferson. Won't happen here." Corporate offices took notice too. At Tarmac Air, changes began quietly. Their PR department issued a second, more sincere statement, this time naming Gloria and offering a direct apology. It didn't erase what had happened, but it marked a start. New internal policies were drafted. Staff underwent new training. For the first time, the company discussed inclusion not as a branding tool, but as a responsibility. Political leaders referenced the incident without naming the airline. One senator from Oregon said during a transportation hearing, "When billion-dollar companies forget the people they serve, it's only a matter of time before someone reminds them, gently or not." But for Gloria, the greatest impact wasn't in policy or headlines. It was in the small moments that followed. Watching her great-granddaughter explain robotics, sitting on a church scholarship committee, walking through her neighborhood where strangers now stopped her, not to gawk, but to thank her for standing up, for not yelling, for proving that quiet strength still carries weight. Her story reminded a nation of something simple yet powerful. You don't have to raise your voice to be heard. You just have to speak when it matters and stand when others look away. And because she did, others now knew they could too. Some stories stay with us long after the screen fades to black, not because they were loud, but because they were true. Gloria Jefferson's journey is one of those emotional stories. It reminds us that strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it simply stands up, folds a coat, and walks forward with dignity. In a world that often rewards noise and spectacle, Gloria's story invites us to rethink what power really looks like. Her calm courage disrupted a system. Her one phone call did more than make headlines. It changed policy, touched lives, and became a symbol of justice that echoed far beyond the terminal gate. This isn't just one of those touching stories we scroll past. It's a reminder that every quiet moment of resistance matters. It's about legacy. It's about the lives of Black women who have long carried burdens without recognition, and who now finally reclaim their space through courage and grace. We often see the polished versions of incredible stories, but this one feels different. This one is real. It reminds us of the unraveled fates, how one act of quiet strength can rewrite years of silence. Gloria stood not just for herself, but for those who have been unseen, unheard, and undervalued. If her story moved you, let it move through you. Share it. Talk about it. Pass it along to someone who needs to remember that justice doesn't always come from shouting. Sometimes it comes from knowing your worth and never letting anyone forget it. These narrated stories, rooted in truth and quiet courage, have the power to light a spark. Let's keep that light going, because the world doesn't just need more stories, it needs more people who live their message.